Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you for joining us for part 2 of our Gender Identity and Islam series. We're so happy to have Brother Ayman with us joining from Maryland. If that's correct, if my memory serves right. And inshallah, I'm going to do only a very brief introduction. And as I know, there's quite a lot of material we'd like to cover today. So let's get started, inshallah. So as we normally do, we will start with the reflection on the Quran. This is one of the verses that Brother Ayman will go mention, but it is one of my verses which I really, really like, as you may have guessed from the last webinar. And it's to do with Sayyidah Maryam, salam alayha. And this is in Surah Al-Imran. The verse is Imran's wife, obviously, the mother of Mary. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I recall when Imran's wife said, Iskalat Imrat al-Imran, Rabbi inni nazartu laka ma fi batni. So she did not know, but she said, whatever is in my belly, it's muhradan fatabakullu minni. It is dedicated solely to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Innaka anta samiul alim. Indeed, you are all hearing and all knowing. So she did not know what was in the belly at that time. Falamma wazataha, when she gave birth to her, she said, Rabbi inni wazaytaha asni, I've given birth to a female. Wallahu and this is now interesting. And what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala respond? Allah says, Wallahu a'lamu bima wazat. Allah knows better. Allah knows that He had destined a female. He had destined one of the greatest women of all time, Sayyidat Nisa'il Alameen of her time, Sayyidah Maryam. And then the verse doesn't just stop at that. It's emphasized walaysa zakara kal unsa, and the male is not like the female. This is very interesting for our discussion, inshallah, today. And it is her special name, which has been chosen for her, wa inni samaytaha Maryam, and she seeks refuge for her lineage from her offspring, which obviously, and the beauty of this is in the Quran, whenever Jesus, Prophet Isa, is mentioned, it's Isa ibn Maryam. So we give regards to this great lady, and we remember her. And there is a reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses the birth or the assignment of sex, if you like, at birth. And as we can see in these verses, she did not know whether it was going to be a boy or a female, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew, and He decreed that. We read this in the following verses. That so her Lord accepted her with good acceptance and brought her up with a good upbringing and entrusted her to Prophet Zachariah. And whenever Zachariah entered upon her, did always find food, found her provision, and he would ask, "Oh Mary, how did you get this?" She said, "It is from Allah indeed. Inna Allaha yarzuqu man yasha bighayri hisab." So Allah provides whomsoever He wills without measure. And then we have the verse which is recommended for parents. So if you're a parent who is watching and you want good offspring, or you would like a dua from the Quran, this dua is often quoted. Thereupon Zakaria called upon his Lord, Hanalaka dua Zakaria Rabbahu Kala Rabbi Habli min ladunka dhurriyate tayyiba innaka samiyut dua. This is a beautiful dua for you to have, inshallah, and for you to use. And inshallah, we have, as I say, Brother Ayman will touch upon this verse as well. So we have as well next week, some of you are joining us at the conference, IFTCC conference in Budapest, in West Budapest, and we're looking forward to joining some of our friends there. IFTC also has a declaration, which I know Brother Ayman has also signed. We'll hopefully look forward to that next week if you are with us in that conference. As I mentioned at the start, this is part 2. So we had Dr. Sharif cover some material for us, and we're grateful for that. You can watch that either on our Facebook or YouTube channel, and I recommend that if you are interested in this topic. So we finally said we're very grateful to have Brother Ayman, and with a wealth of experiences, 25 years of experience in leadership, youth development, coaching. He's even surrounded by a number of youth today as we speak, just those testament for his, mashallah, work that he's been doing. He's a certified mental health coach with Big Brother, Big Sister, Lutheran Social Services, Dar Al-Taqwa, Prince George Community College, Asian, Latino, African, Native American, New Beginnings Youth Center, Howard County Detention Center, and he's the founder of Islamic Leadership Institute of America, which he founded in 2009. And he built on that in 2015 with a youth crisis line, which, mashallah, doing great work with that in a wide range of issues. I guess even maybe gender identity is covered in that as well. He is a member of the Howard County Reentry Council and the Howard County Ethnic Diversity Roundtable. He holds 2 master degrees in electrical engineering, engineering management, and systems engineering, and holds certification in half a dozen of leadership areas. So we're very grateful to have him, and we're very grateful, mashallah, to see all the community development work he has done across the years. So without further ado, I'll hand to Brother Ayman. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khairan, Brother Ali. Sometimes it's hard to find that Zoom button. Let me go ahead. Should I share?
Yes. Bismillah.
Okay. Let me go ahead and do that. And please let me know once you're able to see the screen, inshallah.
Yes, I can see that.
Okay, great. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad, Khatam al-Rusul Nabiyyin, wa nattaba'u bi ihsani yawm al-din. Allahumma shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Jazakumullah khairan, everyone, for joining online and also in person. Inshallah, we spend a little bit of time just reflecting from mainly the Quran, the concept of gender identity, and specifically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has dedicated certain parts of the Quran to talk about the people of Lut alayhi salam, Prophet Lut May Allah's peace and blessings be upon him, and their practices. And obviously, it's very relevant to the world we live in today. As we all know, there's a very strong movement across the globe, literally all countries, about this kind of freedom of identification when it comes to gender. So it's inshallah an opportunity for us to kind of go back to the basics, the foundation that the creator of the heavens and the earth has put for mankind. There is this URL that you see on the screen, and we'll have a QR code later at the end that you can scan, but we try to put there as many resources that we come across. And I want to thank Brother Ali for the great work he's doing across the pond, as they say, with strong support. We actually came across each other through IFTCC, and I was very pleased to see that there are other organizations across the globe that are adopting this issue and helping the general, population understand where things are. So today, inshallah, we'll go ahead and dive right into our agenda. We'll talk about four main things: the world's view of gender identity. What is gender? How does the World Health Organization define it? Other organizations and so forth. Same gender attraction, just in general, and then from an Islamic perspective, of course, and what we feel are some causes of the confusion. And then if there are parents or young folks here, how to promote a healthy gender identity understanding. And let's try to keep this as interactive as possible. You can drop questions in the chat. For those you who are in the room, just raise your hand and we'll try to, at the right point, dive into some of those questions. Or you could keep it to the end, but I'd rather we do it as we go, because who knows how well this technology will work. I'm actually remote and kind of a little bit here using primitive technology. All right, so first thing, some views on gender identity and gender roles. There's some terms that it's important we understand, especially how the world today around us explains it and understands it. So people, generally speaking, in different circles, understand gender to be what a person thinks he or she is all about, male or female. Whereas sex is what a person is when they are born at that point in their life. So, the non-Muslim world, has defined those two different terms, and they could be different. And as we'll see in a little bit, for Muslims, they need to be the same, or we believe that a healthy person, a complete person, would have the same gender and the same sex. Gender identity is how a person identifies themselves to be. An expression is how they express themselves. So someone could identify with a certain gender, but they express themselves to be the same gender or a different one. So they could claim to be a male, but they dress as a female, for example. That's how they express themselves. When it comes to roles, it's how they see themselves as part of the global community. Their contribution towards the world and the functions that they would assume or not assume. And then obviously sexual orientation specifically refers to intimate relations. So these are the different terms that the global world, the World Health Organization has specifically put into practice. And many health organizations across the world, including Muslim countries, have adopted these types of definitions. And some of these definitions do not align, of course, with the divine revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who created, human beings and everything else. But it's important for us to understand how the rest of the world recognizes these things, because it would help us understand how to interact and also answer a lot of questions that might be on some of our minds. So again, to summarize, in Islam, both gender and sex are the same for a healthy, sound person. Someone who has a sound mind, a healthy body and spirit, they're going to be the same thing. And we'll see why we believe in that later, inshallah, today. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this ayah we probably hear every Friday in Jum'ah khutbah. When the khatib starts his khutbah, he calls upon people, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ اتَّقُوا رَبَّكُمْ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن نَفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ وَخَلَقَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا وَبَثَّ مِنْهُمَا رِجَالًا كَثِيرًا وَنِسَاءً. O you people, and here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing the entire population of human beings, believers and disbelievers. He's referring to the people here as people, not, oh, you who believe. So this is a message to everyone. Ittaqu rabbakum, be cognizant of your Lord and the boundaries that he has set for you. Be God conscious. And the Rabb is the Lord, the caretaker, right? And it's really important to pay attention when reading the Quran to the words. Allah uses Rabbakum, your Lord. He didn't say Allah. He could have said Taqullah. But again, not every human being recognizes Allah to be the one to be worshipped. But most people recognize Allah as the caretaker, right? That he's the one who provides for us. He's the one who gives us provisions. He's the one who created us. Now, of course, there are some people who do not believe even that, but he is bestowing upon us here in this ayah, he's giving us that indicator that the relationship I have with you is your caretaker, right? I'm the one who created you, and because of that, you're singling me by my actions. And what is that action? الَّذِي خَلَقَكُمْ. He's the one who created you. So obviously the creator is the most knowledgeable about his creation. If we take a simplistic example, a mechanical engineer who designed a car is the most knowledgeable person about that car, the performance of the car, how it's going to work, how it's going to function. So now comes next, a statement by the creator about ourselves. What is it? He created us from one soul, from Adam alayhi salam. And from Adam, he created his spouse, وَخَلَقَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا, his spouse, right? And from both of them, وَبَثَّ مِنْهُمَا, both of them, plenty of men and women, right? So in this ayah, we see something very, two important concepts or principles. First is that the human race, the human species came from two people, Adam and Hawa. And Adam was a very special case. He's the first man or first human being to be created ever. And he was created, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in other parts of the Quran, from dirt, right? And from him, he created another very special person or creation, which is the first female. She was created from Adam alayhi salam. And then later in the Quran, Allah gives us another third very unique creation of a human being, which is Jesus, peace be upon him, being created from a mother with no father, right? And then of course, there's all of us who are created from a man and a woman, just like the ayah says. And then Allah says again, be God conscious, and that you question, be very careful about his boundaries, be cognizant about these boundaries, and you question arham. It's interesting how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about kinship in this same ayah. It's as if he's trying to tell us that, relationships within the family come from where? From that man and that woman who would bring that offspring. And then the ayah ends with Allah is overseeing what we do. So we started to start this discussion with this ayah because it kind of puts a few things into perspective. Number one, the reference for a human being is the creator, what the creator tells us. It's not what we kind of speculate or think, but it's what the creator tells us. And then a couple of really key concepts here that we just mentioned. All right, so in Islam, gender identity, gender expression, gender role, sexual orientation for a normal, healthy, sound person are all aligned. What does that mean? That means if someone in Islam is born as a male, they are going to grow up and identify as a male. They're going to be seeing themselves as a young boy, and then a teenager boy, and then a young man, and an old grown-up man, and so forth. And they will express themselves in such a manner. They would behave in such a manner. They would reflect certain things and ideas in such a manner. And they would assume what a role of a male in society is, again, based on what? Based on how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us the role of a male. For example, الرجال قوامون على النساء. The men have the concept of quwama over women. And that's a very deep concept, again, in Islam. If we take the word quwama and we try to translate it into English, it would mean a lot of different words, from guardianship to supervision to care to oversight. One of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Qayyum, Qayyum al-Samawati wal-Ard, the overseer of the heavens and the earth. He's the one who oversees, he overlooks his creation, but not just looking at them, because that's Al-Basir, that's the one who sees, but he's looking at them with with the sense of care and love. What do they need so I can accomplish their needs? What are they missing so I can answer their calls and so forth? So that's a qayyum, and qawama is derived from that same root, same word, which means the overseer of the needs of the wife and the women in society in general. So again, this is the general Islamic principle, and we're going to see some real life examples, and then we'll see the deviation from that, how it could or how it has looked like in the past. This ayah is from Surah Al-Imran that Brother Ali kind of started us off with. Here, the mother of Maryam, alayha salam, she made a promise to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Between her and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, she said, "Oh Allah, give me a son who can work for your sabil, for your cause. He can serve in the temple, in the masjid." And we know that the men, goes back to gender role, they have the responsibility of carrying the message of Allah from one generation to another. That's an obligation upon men. The sisters can support that, but they're not obligated to do it. Just like the men are obligated to pray in the masjid, to pray Jummah in the masjid, to pray their 5 prayers in the masjid. The women have the option to do it, but it's not an obligation on them. They have other obligations, right? So every gender has responsibilities and has certain types of things that they can or required to do or don't have to do, and so forth. So here she made a promise. She said, "Oh Allah, give me a son who can serve," because she was very pious and she wanted to dedicate her life and the life of her offspring to the service of God. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of his abundant graciousness, he did not give her a son. He gave her something different. He gave her a very special girl who would then bring a very special son, a very special boy. So he could have just given her a son, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah knows best. But, one of the things we can think of is he gave her something even more than what she asked. She gave her a special woman who would deliver a boy without even being touched by a man, which is Isa alayhi salam. فَلَمَّا وَضَعَتْهَا أُنْثَى, when she delivered a female, and here Allah clearly defines a gender called untha, female, and Allah knows best what she said. And he tells us here that even the mother of Maryam alayhi salam, she recognized that the male and the female are not the same. وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنْثَى. Right? This is a very clear statement from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator, that the male and the female, they're not the same, right? They're treated equally in Islam. They have equitable treatment. They have equitable rights, but they're not the exactly same thing, right? Because they have, again, different responsibilities and roles and so forth. So she was a little, surprised or like taken back, because she wanted a boy to serve, and she didn't know that Allah will do something very special with this girl, bringing another very special person who actually will guide people to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another tip here, like Brother Ali earlier shared a beautiful dua for parents to protect their offspring from misguidance or from shaitan. Here's another dua, and Maryam, the mother of Mary, made this very special dua, and as the scholars say, because of her dua, Maryam and Isa alayhim salam are the only 2 human beings that have never been touched by shaitan at the time of birth, right? So any human being, once they're delivered, what happens, right? They cry. And as the Prophet ﷺ told us, why do they cry? Because shaitan pinches them in their side here. We get pinched, all of us, in our side here, as the Prophet ﷺ says. So what do we do as Muslims? We make the adhan in the right ear of the baby and the iqamah on the left ear so that the shaitan can run away. So here she made a dua. She said, وَإِنِّي أَعِيذُهَا بِكَ وَذُرِّيَّتَهَا مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. I seek refuge in you, Allah, from shaitan and her, and her offspring, to protect them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded to her dua, just like he responded to the dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam, when the Prophet ﷺ said, I'm the answer to the dua of my father Ibrahim. All right, we talked about this concept in Islam that men have extra responsibility than women because of what Allah has blessed or has given men that he might not have given women, right? It doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It just means that they're created differently, both physically and mentally. They have different capabilities. There's certain things women can do, men cannot do, and vice versa. And part of that is the men are responsible for society in general and for taking care of the needs of the women. So again, here we see in another ayah, very clear distinction, two genders, men and women. And in other parts of the Quran, Allah makes it clear that they're equal when it comes to reward for their good deeds, their responsibilities towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, giving sadaqah and so forth. So in other words, in Islam, there's no gender spectrum. There's just a he and a she, that's it. There's no they, Z, or a spectrum of things, or I could be, a guy, but also I, express myself in other ways. There's no such thing. It's just the same. It's one thing. There's no spectrum. It's pretty much bipolar. And anything other than that is considered abnormal. It requires some intervention. It could be medical intervention, it could be psychological, it could be spiritual, or some combination of thereof. And there could be reasons why people think otherwise. So pause here for like 5 seconds if anyone has a question or something you wanted to share, inshallah, before we move on. Any questions here from the group or online? Thank you. All right, you can put also your questions in the chat. And we got more people here, Ali, so I hope there's no background noise. If there is, just give me a...
No background noise. And
okay.
Yes, if anybody wants to join in, then please do. Bismillah.
All right, great. So let's talk a little bit about the perspective on gender identity from an Islamic perspective. But again, let's start with some principles. The first principle is what? إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. The deeds are based on their intentions, right? This is so important. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what is in someone's heart, right? It's not for us to judge each other. We might not even know what's in our heart. Some of us might think we're doing good, but really we're doing it because we want to show off or because we have some other worldly intention. So the Prophet ﷺ started this dua. It's an authentic dua in Bukhari. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Deeds are based on their intentions, and for every person, what he has intended. And the interesting thing about that hadith, it talks about actually at the end, marriage. If someone migrates to marry a person, for whatever reason, then his intention is for that. So let's remember that principle. The second principle here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not hold us accountable on our thoughts. لا يؤاخذكم الله باللغو في أيمانكم ولكن يؤاخذكم بما كسبت قلوبكم. He holds you accountable by what your hearts have earned. For a heart to earn something, it has to be accompanied by action. So we can sit back here and think about doing an evil thought, but if we don't do it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to hold us accountable for it. We're not going to get punished for that. If we do it, we'll get accounted for one sin. Now, if we think of a positive thought and we intend to do it, but we don't do it, out of Allah's mercy, what does He do? He rewards us with 1 hasanah. And if we do it, He gives us, 10 hasanat, and Allah multiplies forever He wills. He's indeed the all-giving. So another thing, and this is important because sometimes some people will have thoughts in their minds, whatever it is, and as long as we don't act on these thoughts, inshallah, it's fine, right? We might be walking down the street, we see a nice looking sister and we're attracted to that. As a matter of fact, the Prophet ﷺ was talking to a young man one day, and there was a sister who looked pretty. She was passing behind him, and the guy, he just looked at her. And the Prophet ﷺ turned his face around towards him, and he looked again at her, and he moved his face again 3 times. And it happened, at the 3rd time, the father of this young person was passing by. He said, what's going on? He noticed there was something like going on. And the Prophet ﷺ's response was, nothing. He just got distracted a little bit. He didn't even tell the father what was going on. And this teaches us a number of things. Number one is we don't have to share everything about people. Number two is that it is normal to some degree that we get distracted by something. But as long as we don't act on it, we control ourselves, we go back to the taqwa, the boundaries that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set for us, then inshallah, it's fine. It's part of our struggle on this planet. All right, so this chart kind of shows us real quick the landscape of relationships when it comes to opposite gender attraction. So there is a wanted and an unwanted relationship, right? What is an unwanted relationship? It's where the intention and the action are both aligned. So a person has an intention to have a relationship with a woman, let's say, right? Then he can go about it by two ways. He can marry that person according to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, or he can just have a casual relationship. The marriage is what the Prophet ﷺ recommended and ordered us to do. Anything else is going to be sinful, right? So we're just buddies, we're friends, we're hanging out, we're living together, whatever it is, it's going to be sinful. There's no other, it's either this or that. There's no other third option, right? Or someone who doesn't have an intention to fool around with anyone else. They're not into a relationship, but they're attracted by someone, a classmate, a neighbor, someone in the community. They're attracted and they know what's right, what's wrong. They're trying to stay on the straight path. So they're going to be struggling. That's their internal jihad. And inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward them for that. So as the scholars say, when it comes to, opposite gender relationship, there's only one option, which is in line with the Prophet ﷺ's sunnah, which is to follow the path of marriage. Anything else is not going to be, on the right path. With same gender attraction, very similar. There is a wanted relationship. There's someone who wants to have a same gender relationship with another person. And I've broken down into two types of people, someone who promotes it and someone who's just following the crowd. It's like, it's a cool thing these days. This is what people are doing. Or I grew up in a society and this is what my teachers and the media and everyone is talking about. So I don't really know what's the problem, right? They're just a follower. Then there's someone who doesn't want that, but for one reason or another, they're attracted to someone. And very similar to the opposite gender attraction, they're also struggling. And inshallah, they get the help they need. And inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards them for their struggle, right? But here we find whether it's a promoter or a follower, if the intention is I want that same gender relationship, an intimate relationship, it's sinful. There's no other option as well here. So I thought these charts can kind of throw out a little bit of clarity. And we're focused here on same gender attraction. So there's 4 key roles in society today. There's people who promote it. There's people who follow it. There's people who are bystanders. There's just looking at it, watching or hearing it or whatever it is. And we'll talk about how these people could be pulled into group number 2 very subtly. I have a lot of young people in this room, and show of hands, how many people here in their school, someone, an educator has told you to use a pronoun when you are on a Zoom call, right? All of you guys. You don't use it? No. Okay. Right, good. So that's a way where you're very, now even you noticing, you're kind of being pulled from a bystander into a follower, right? People are telling you, giving you whatever reason it is, whatever logic, maybe it's to show diversity, to show inclusion, or to clarify to people that Ahmed is a male name or whatever, right? But really that could have a side effect if we're not very careful. So we'll talk a bit about that, inshallah. And then there's a 4th group who are trying to correct the facts. They're trying to make sure, the proper information gets out. All right, so when it comes to promoter, that first group, this was very clear in the Quran in multiple places. There's about 10 qualities of these people that I pulled out from the Quran. We'll go through them real quick, inshallah. But it ranges from they're disgusting people to immodest, to impure. They're anti-fitra. They're going against the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Fitra, which is the normal state of a creature. You know, an animal gets thirsty, it goes, looks for water. A plant is looking for sunlight. You start to see, you know, the sunflower tracking the sun and so forth. That's the fitra. It's what Allah has created its creation on. So human beings have a fitra. A normal average human being at some age during adolescence, they would start to ask themselves the very, you know, known popular question is, what's my role in life? What am I all about, right? Why this path? Why is this proper? Why is this not? They're addicted. They're not using proper wisdom. They're insane. They're ignorant. They will be destroyed, and they're transgressing over other people, not only committing injustice to themselves, and at the end, they're also a disgrace. So we'll see some of these qualities in the Quran. So first quality that they're disgusting is, as Lut alayhi salam, he lived in this town with people, and he told them, he said, you people, أتأتون الفاحشة ما سبقكم بها من أحد من العالمين? Are you committing a sin that no one before you has ever committed? Now, the word fahisha, as the scholars explain it, is a sin that is very disgusting. It's a sin that people would kind of not brag about, or would look very down upon, right? So zina, relationships like that, these are considered fahisha. So here, one, they invented, you can grab a chair from the room next door. They invented something new that no one ever came up with, and they're committing a despicable sin, right? So that's number one. Number two, because they brought up something that no one ever came up with before, they innovated when it comes to matters of fitra, of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? There's certain things we can't innovate in. We can innovate in the matters of this world, like come up with new medications, new technologies, new ways of doing things. But we can't, come up with something like, hey, here's a new way to pray. These are things what we call tawqifiyya. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already determined how they're going to be, and we don't have an option to change them. Marriage falls under that. The names of the surahs of the Quran fall under that. They're tawqifiyya. Surah An-Naml is a naml. Now, we can translate the meaning of naml to be ants, but we can't call it the chapter of the ants. It's no longer Quran. It's chapter of a naml, because the word naml it's just like as if it's part of the Quran. It's tawqifi, right? So same thing here. We cannot really innovate. So these people innovated in intimate relations. They came up with a new way that human beings have intimacy, and it's not something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has intended for us to do. Here, it shows how they were addicted to it. Not only were they doing it, but what's the word that Allah uses here? بَلْ أَنْتُمْ قَوْمٌ مُسْرِفُونَ. You are people that excessively do this type of behavior, right? إِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالَ شَهْوَةً. You approach the men out of lust, not doing that with women. Indeed, you're people who are very excessive in this behavior. And then here in this ayah in Surah Al-Shu'ara, he says, I'm from what your actions are disgusted. I'm disgraced about this. I'm abhorrent to this type of action. So it's showing again, even back in the day, how it was a very disgraceful thing. Here again, not only were they committing this action together, but they were doing it in public. In another ayah, تَأْتُونَ فِي نَادِيكُمُ الْمُنْكَرِ. In your gatherings, you do these things. I mean, people just be sitting together and they just, engage in this type of relationship. وَأَنْتُمْ تُبْصِرُونَ. And you can see it. It's like you do it and you can see it. It was so public, so prevalent in the society. Today, we see people talking about it. We see these nude types of activities in some big cities, marathons, biking, whatever, beaches, all kinds of things. And that's very similar to what this is talking about, this ayah. All right, they're also described by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as ignorant people. Really, you approach men instead of women out of lust? That's a question. Like, really, you have any brains? You are people who are ignorant or off the track. You have no awareness. They're described also by their own selves in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quotes the people of Lut alayhi salam, saying what to Lut? When he said, stop doing this, فَمَا كَانَ جَوَابَ قَوْمِهِ إِلَّا أَنْ قَالُوا أَخْرِجُوا آلَ لُوطٍ. The answer, the jawab of his people was, take Lut and his people out of our town. Why? إِنَّهُمْ أُنَاسٌ يَتَطَهَّرُونَ, because they're people trying to be pure. So they're kind of like saying themselves that we're not pure people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is quoting them, إِنَّهُمْ أُنَاسٌ يَتَطَهَّرُونَ, because they're telling Lut that you're trying to be a pure person, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also here describes them as being impure. They're insane. Now we know that the three angels, before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed the town of Lut, three angels were sent to give him, advance warning, and they appeared as handsome men. And they met one of Lut's daughters. They asked about, directions and things like that. So she went quickly to her father and she said, there's three nice-looking men looking for you, and we need to make sure the people of the town don't see them. But the word went out, and the people of the town knew that there's three handsome guys. So what did they do? يَهْرَعُونَ إِلَيْهِ. They went running towards his house. This shows you the level of lust that they have. They went running towards his house. وَمِن قَبْلِ كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ السَّيِّئَاتِ. And they've been committing these sins from before. And when they approached his house, he said, Ya qawm, oh my people, here's my daughters. They're more pure for you to marry, but leave my guests alone. فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُخْزُونِي فِي ضَيْفِي. Leave my guests alone and have a remembrance of Allah. Don't humiliate me in front of my guests trying to approach them. أَلَيْسَ مِنْكُمْ رَجُلٌ رَشِيدٌ. Is there not a wise man from amongst you? So obviously here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing them as they lost total reasoning by rushing towards the house. They turned from like creatures of reasoning to creatures of just immediate response of just like animals, right? A lion sees a deer, it just runs on it, right? It doesn't rationalize things like a human being. And then lastly here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes them as transgressors. And this is really important. Sometimes I remember when we started working into this area of gender relations back in 2008, I tell people there could come a day when people who try to get married, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes, will be prevented. LGBT lobby might say, this is hurting our feelings, right? And this is exactly what they did back then. So what happened is they became also transgressors upon other people by kicking them out of their towns, preventing them from having proper relationships and so forth. Not just that they're doing their own, whatever lifestyle it is, but also preventing others from following whatever they want. So here, بَلْ أَنْتُمْ قَوْمٌ عَادُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes them as people who go against others. عَادُون, they're enemies. And of course, at the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O Lut, we are angels from your Lord, messengers. Don't worry about these people. They're not going to harm you. We're going to destroy them in the morning. Indeed, the morning is close by. And even your wife will be destroyed with them. Although Lut's wife was not amongst the people promoting this, but she was one of the group number 2, which is a supporter. And this is really important to keep in mind. Today, we see on the Islamic landscape, at some big conventions, some Muslim popular people who join LGBT movements from the idea that let's support them so they support us getting our civil rights. And that's a very dangerous thing. That's exactly what the wife of Lut used to do. She used to go give them news that, hey, there's interesting people coming into the town or this or that, but she wouldn't actually commit the same sin that they were committing, but she was a supporter. So it's really important that we be very clear where we draw the line. There's a big difference between human rights. It is every human being's right to worship whoever they want. That is a right that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given all human beings. They can worship Allah, they can worship something else. And Allah will judge and treat everyone differently on the day of judgment. But when it comes to a relationship, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not decreed that it is okay for anyone to have a relationship with someone from the same gender, regardless of their faith and their belief. So that's where things have to be clear. All right, so promoters of the same gender attraction, from our understanding, from what we just read in the Quran, are evil people. That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described them. We cannot sugarcoat it. They are evil people, and they will be destroyed in this life and the hereafter. There's a punishment in both, and that's also clear in the Quran. So that's the first group. Real quick, I want to go through the follower group. The follower group could be a group that's curious. They want to learn more about what do these people think about. They can be people following fake promises of, love and tender and gentleness or whatever it is. They could be fearful from being ridiculed, that if they say something that is truthful, they be seen as intolerant or whatever the term that you want to put on it. Or they're distracted by what's going on in society, by media, by messaging. And maybe they're confused, maybe they're misguided, maybe they have doubts about themselves or things around them. So just real quick, these are some of the qualities of these people. And here are some examples how someone could become that group by waswasa to shaitan. Just like shaitan whispered to Adam to give him a fake promise about a tree or make him curious about a tree. He was in a Jannah that had, infinite number of trees, and he was already living there. He didn't need anything. And Allah told him, there's just one tree out of these billions and billions of trees, don't come close to. But shaitan came to him and whispered, right? Should I tell you about a tree that makes you live forever and a king, this and that? But he's already living there. He doesn't need anything, but he became curious about it. And he gave him fake promises, and he ate from the tree. So that could be a tactic that happens to some people, is they become curious about what they're seeing in the media or hearing about. Or they get distracted, right? They get distracted and maybe there's something preventing their heart from seeing the truthfulness. Distractions could be many things, again, around us. Or they are confused. As shaitan here, again, in his communication with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, I will take them astray, meaning us, and I will make them change their bodies and even their animals, and they will take the shaitan as a guide for them. And they get confused about what's what. We talked about some of these doubts, delusions, right? I will partner with them in their food, their provisions, and so forth. Or we're just misguided by shaitan or our own desires. And on the day of judgment, when shaitan sees us, he says, I just invited you, you followed me. I fear inni akhafu Allah Rabbul Alameen. I fear Allah, the Lord of the universe. All right, so followers of the same gender attraction are misguided. They're also accountable for their actions, just like any other human being. And they could be punished in this life and the hereafter, just as the example we saw by the wife of Lut alayhi salam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might decide also to forgive them if they, get back to the right path. So, because Allah says what? He does not forgive associating a partner with himself, but he forgives everything beyond that. So no matter what a person is doing, there's always a hope that we can be forgiven by the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and go to his Jannah. But those who associate a partner, they're going to be very far away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're not going to be eligible for his forgiveness. Now let's move on to the bystander group real quick, and then I see a couple of questions. Inshallah, we'll pause and take those questions. So the bystanders are two groups mainly. Silent people, or people who are inactive. They're not taking action. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes us in the Quran as people who are vocal and we're active. he says about the people who hide what Allah has revealed in the book to gain something in this life as what? As people who eat fire in their bellies. So if we know a truth and we don't bring it to the surface, that's how Allah is describing us. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَكْتُمُونَ مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ مِنَ الْكِتَابِ, people who hide or keep secret, they don't reveal, they suppress what Allah has brought down in the book in order to buy something. ثَمَنًا قَلِيلًا. What could they be buying? They could be buying being part of the crowd, not being ridiculed, making some money, being politically correct, not making enemies. These are all things we can purchase in this life, right? I can have a group of buddies as long as I get along with them. But how are they described? They're people, they eat nothing in their bellies but fire. That's a really serious, scary description. And Allah does not talk to them on the day of judgment. And He doesn't purify them from their sins, and for them is a severe punishment. So for us as Muslims, we cannot be silent on what we believe is not truthful, right? We cannot, those who don't put the he and she because they recognize what's behind it, that's great. Kudos to you, right? Now, some of us understand these are subtle tactics. We need to be more careful. And if someone challenges you, you should not be fearful or intimidated to explain your point of view, because that's basically what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects from us. And He says what in Surah Al-Imran, we're the best nation brought out to mankind for 3 reasons: doing good, preventing evil, and believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right, so bystanders are passively supporting an evil if they don't speak about it by not addressing the issue, or they could be unknowingly pulled into the followers group without them even noticing. And sometimes it's a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or a wake-up call for us to go to that group so we can take a different stand. All right, so we're going to pause here, take a couple of questions, see if there are other questions here in the room. Yes. All right, approaches to align, we'll talk about that inshallah. Okay, could you provide reference to the hadith of the young man? Inshallah, okay, I'll try to send that, get it and send it to Brother Ali. Inshallah, we can share it. Literature resources on the theory of content covered today. Unfortunately, there is not a lot of Islamic literature on gender identity. Just recently, people started talking about it. If you go to gender identity or gender.islamicleadership.org, we've put there as many resources we can find. They're mostly talks and videos by different, da'is and scholars across the globe, but I have not come across any, at least recent books or literature on the topic. Right, that's a great question. So definitely a lot of us in different fields will be challenged by this issue, whether we're educators, doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, policemen, correctional facility officers, right? I mean, I was visiting a prison a couple of weeks ago, and the brothers there said, well, there's a guy, he's a brother, he's a Muslim, but he's a girl. Can he pray with us? I said, you guys can't prevent him. That's between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if he wants to join the prayer, but have him stand in the back, So they allow him to pray, but he stands by himself because he identifies as a female, and he's or has done or is in the process of doing some surgery to transform, right? So to answer the question, how do we approach? There's a couple of important things to recognize. According to a couple of scholars who sit on the board of AMJA, the Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America, we have to treat people who exhibit LGBT lifestyle with respect, right? We have to deal with them just like anyone else. We're not here to judge people, but we cannot allow them to redefine to us what is right and what is wrong. We cannot allow them to force us to act in certain ways and so forth, right? So if you're in the medical field, you get a patient, he looks like a male, but describes himself as a female. you're gonna follow your protocol, right? You're gonna treat the person based on what you see in front of you, and you know, there could be certain situations where you need to consult with a scholar, like very specific issue, and so on. A couple of days ago, someone on a group shared a case I think it's in England, in the UK. Someone who, she did a surgery. He changed from a guy to a female, and then he wanted to go back from a female to a guy. And he said, if the doctors had told me what I'm getting into, I would have never done this transformation. I would have stayed a guy and acted as a female. I mean, still that person needs help, but a lot of people actually, after they do these transformations, they end up either committing suicide or having a very depressive life, or whatever the case might be. And there's so many reasons why these things are not even sound. But let's just go through this for the sake of questions. Right, how to prevent being unwillingly a follower. Number one is attending events like these, being educated, right? So we understand. We have a really good video on that website I shared, Gender.Islamic Leadership, that talks about, it's not our video, it's another brother, but he talks about the tactics of LGBT that they use to kind of subtly pull people to be more sympathetic with them, and so forth. That's a really good video. I would recommend. We can try to go to the website real quick and look at it. So that's one way. So be educated, attending sessions like that, talking to people about the issue in your local masjid, you know, getting the opinions of the imams, and again, educating each other. All right. Yeah. Type. So I think we're running up on time, but real quick, first I'm going to see here in the room. Any questions? Sure. Other questions, gentlemen? Okay. Yes.
Like, you had a relationship with it, right? And she ends up becoming a supporter of the LGBT stuff. Would you be classified as like let's say you don't like agree with any of that stuff? Like that's your wife, right? So would you be classified as like a supporter of that stuff or a bystander?
All right, so I'll repeat the question so everyone can hear. So the question is, someone is married and their spouse, after some time, became a supporter of this whole ideology, right? Where does the other spouse stand? That's a really good question. It depends on the level of their support, right? If they're sympathetic, and a lot of people, unfortunately, in the Muslim community, they feel very sympathetic, like it's okay, it's their right, they're nice people, you know, and there's a difference between caring for people and supporting them. There's a fine line, right? We love everyone, regardless who they are, what they do. And if someone is doing something that is not in line with the Prophet ﷺ, what do? We do what the Prophet ﷺ would have done, which is make dua for them, right? But if it goes beyond that level, and now it's affecting the family, it's affecting the person, or the person just, the two spouses can't reconcile that difference, then a separation could be an option, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us that option. But it doesn't mean everything has to be like that, right? And we had an example here of a number of prophets where their spouses never believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right. That's a good question. So it'd be more case-by-case basis. The person has to kind of consult with a religious scholar on that particular situation. Other questions? All right. Not going to spend too much time on this. You know, there's no concrete scientific evidence of what causes people to follow such a lifestyle. But we do know through our deen that a big part of it is improper understanding of our purpose in life. Our purpose, why are we here, what the meaning of worship means, our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The medical community and others have determined that there are some psychological factors, right? If you wake up in the mirror every morning and you say, today is going to be a great day. Today is going to be a great day. you'd probably have a good day because you are motivating yourself. You're positively looking at the world for that day. And subconsciously, you're trying to do something great for yourself or people around you. Same thing, if someone continuously thinks negatively about themselves, they're going to be in such a state. And the Prophet ﷺ once saw a man who was sick. He said, how are you doing? He said, Ya Rasulullah, I'm so sick. So he made dua for him that Allah would heal him. What did the man do? He said, no, Allah, Rasulullah, I'm so sick. I don't know if I'll be healed. I'm so sick. He kept whining and complaining. And over, the Prophet said, make dua for him. And he says, I'm so sick. I feel really down in this. And the Prophet said, what can I do for a man who wants that? And shortly thereafter, the guy passed away, right? So the way we see the world plays a factor in how we perceive things and so forth. So similarly, if someone is raised in a certain way, is always talked to in a certain way, is surrounded by certain types of influences, or is told or confused about who he or she could be, they could end up obviously being seeing themselves differently. So those are some reasons that the literature talks about. Obviously, there's a scientific discourse between different schools of thought, but to us, we don't need to prove it. We know what's right and wrong. There was a question about how to promote healthy identity. First important thing, any human being needs to have a sense of purpose and belonging, right? We have to, at some point in our life, usually the scholars say around adolescence, that's when people start to rebel against their parents, not following requests at home and things like that, and thinking outside the box for themselves, because that's part of their fitrah kicking in. Why am I here, right? So having a purpose keeps us occupied, keeps us motivated. Gratitude, people who don't like who they are, they're ungrateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They don't appreciate what Allah has given them. We can always look at a glass half empty, even though it's half full. So how we look at things is a very important thing. And sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of love for his creation or out of correction, he might take a blessing away from someone who doesn't appreciate it so that the person can get to feel it and appreciate it better. Properly understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from a young age is really important. Who is he? How do we single him by his actions? How do we single him by our actions? The tawheed, the concept of tawheed and our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Treating siblings fairly. I've seen sometimes parents, we treat boys in one way and girls in another way, and they're siblings. And that could make some girls want to be like boys because they see that their brother is getting certain, preferential treatment or privileges or whatever. Or guys who want to be like their sisters or vice versa. So that's important that, we treat kids with what they need and show them the love, whether they're male or female. The Prophet ﷺ met a man and he said, Rasulullah, I don't kiss or hug any of my 10 kids. And his response is, it's really hard for me to change anything that Allah has taken the kindness out of his heart. Right. So in some Muslim communities, we feel it's improper to hug our 15-year-old boy. I mean, that's not true. Boys need love and care as well, but it has to be reflected and presented in the proper way. The concept of modesty, of course, is absent in today's world, unfortunately, but that's a very important thing. As the Prophet ﷺ says, one of the very early messages of prophets before me was, if you don't have modesty, just go do whatever you want. Basically, you're done. There's no point of trying to correct you. So these are some of the things, addressing trauma. Sometimes trauma could have long-lasting effects, don't appear until years or even decades later. So a person, young or old, could have a traumatic experience. And it might not show till later when a trigger happens. And it's not a bad idea to talk to counselors, to parents, to friends, to open up to a trusted resource, someone who can help us sometimes uncover things we might not see in our own selves. There's a lot of these days assessments online that you can do about personalities, whether it's related to career or just personal characteristics and things like that. And these help us understand our weaknesses and strengths a little bit. All right, so real quick, who we are, and then we'll take more questions. We're a one-stop hub for young people. We don't do sports, but we do everything else besides sports. Advocacy, you can see a group of us down there at Congress lobbying for Muslim rights in India when they were hanging people on trees and things like that. And that was 2-3 years ago. Now it's even worse. Next to it, you see a couple of young guys in a coaching program, fishing. Above that is a bunch of middle schoolers in the mountains with a trip. There's some sisters next to them studying project management to lead projects in their community. To the far right is our former chairman. He was 20 at the time, a college student. He was doing a big real estate transaction for the organization. And on the far left, some little girls. So it's all about leadership development, personal development. These are the 3 main things we do: education. Young people can take classes, get certified in different things, or we do community projects, food drives, scholarship programs, crisis stabilization, things like that, or some research and so forth. So real quick, here's the website again for people who did not get it earlier, gender.islamicleadership.org, and then we'll take a couple more questions here real quick. All right, so for people who are practicing or experiencing LGBT lifestyle, they're not Muslim, they want to come to Islam, definitely the answer is come to Islam first, right? Everything can be forgiven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except not being under his fold of belief, right? So for that person, it's better for them to die in a state of Islam and sinful than not to die in a state of Islam and being, a beautiful person. Right, so we encourage the sister or the brother to come to the deen. Now, as the Prophet ﷺ said, this deen is deep, so get into it slowly. We don't need to talk to them about gender identity at all right now. We just need to talk to them about who Allah is and the mercy of Allah and how Allah is the Lord of everyone. They come into Islam, they start to practice, they read Quran, they pray, they fast Ramadan. And just those acts of worship, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, oh, you people, worship your Lord, worship your Lord. So you can achieve taqwa. So by them practicing Islam, they're inshallah gonna attain taqwa and get closer. And when the time is appropriate by Allah's will, inshallah they'll understand the proper way of relationship. So we try to focus on what matters more, which is the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right. Brother Ali, can we, do people have the ability to unmute if they need to ask more questions?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for doing the Q&A so well. Alhamdulillah, really made it easy for me. So yes, as I said, if there are people who would like to raise their hand in the webinar, you can speak. If you would like to speak, just be aware that your name does appear on this public webinar. Other than that, like as you have been doing, you can ask anonymously as well on the Q&A at the bottom. And yeah, and I've just been reflecting on mashallah, the great work Islamic leadership is doing in terms of youth development, and actually having a variety of leadership programs for the youth to do and actively engage in, as we were seeing the mashallah past young leader. I wanted to ask Brother Ayman, what intrigued you to write upon gender identity in particular and dedicate a section of that on your website? What were some of the things that influenced you to make that decision?
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. So a lot of what we do is actually driven by need in the community. So the first time we got involved in this area was in 2008. And I actually attended a conference by a group of Christian churches here in Maryland. They had a 3-day conference at a university about the topic, where they were taking positions very similar to ours. It was very educational for me. And the reason was we had a young person in the community who was going through some struggle, a young brother. He was about 14 at the time, and there were no resources to help him, right? So for me, it was an educational experience. I attended a 3-day conference with our brethren from the Christian community, understood their perspective. And I had an opportunity to meet a number of people who were struggling, and they got support, and they became able to live normal lives. From there, we wrote a small paper that we published from the Supreme Court, made their decision, I think 2012, I believe, or 2008, I can't remember, about legalizing same-gender marriages. And prior to that, a couple of months or a year before, the state of California was the first state in the United States to prevent counseling for young people who are struggling, right? The LGBT lobby calls it conversion therapy, where counselors try to convert someone who's quote unquote gay to become straight, right? That's how they promote it. And in the law, California is the first state to do that. They prevent anyone under 18 from seeking help. So anyone under 18 who wants to go to a doctor, the doctor can't treat them, but just like that person, the brother or sister who had the question, I'm in the medical field, how do I deal with this, right? The same law got enacted in Maryland 3 years ago, 2018, where it extended to include not only psychiatrists and psychologists, but also imams and rabbis and priests. So if you're an imam at a masjid and a young person approaches you like, Imam, I have these thoughts in my mind and I feel awkward or whatever, what do I do? Technically, he cannot give you advice. So that was another trigger that promoted us to write a little paper about our perspective on this thing. And as we know, every day there's developments, so there's new needs to educate each other more.
Alhamdulillah. No, may Allah bless you for the resource. And as you've said, it's the same here, that we started as primarily focused on same-sex attraction, same-sex lust, and we are seeing the need for gender identity more and more becoming a need, and having the Islamic standpoint. And mashallah, thank you for the Quranic verses and the analysis between, difference between a promoter, a supporter, and a bystander, because you have this in even the LGBTQIA, isn't it? They say ally, or someone who's like, on the side and is an ally to that. And the beautiful example of the Prophet's own wife, Prophet Lut's wife, not actually promoting that, but because she was facilitating it in a way. And Allah puts her as an example for us, in that when we see how difficult it is to take a God-centric view, do Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar, as you mentioned in this area, but how important it is to find the right balance between knowing what Islam says, knowing what the Deen says, and also having the correct akhlaq in dealing with people who may not share our view or may not, and it's about having that. There's so many things where we disagree, and we may disagree on many things ideologically, but that doesn't mean that we don't appreciate, or we are not showing compassion, or not showing the akhlaq that the Prophet taught us to deal with absolutely anything and everyone. And you're absolutely right that it's more about fighting against a blanket ban, which only allows one ideology to take stand, which isn't inclusive it isn't diverse. You know, a lot of the times they talk about diversity, inclusivity, but they only talk about maybe LGBTQ, and they wouldn't talk about other parts. And it's about actually, if we really talk about intersectionality or diversity within our workplaces, then it's having that diversity where we have the maturity to say we can have different viewpoints, we can disagree on them, but we have the akhlaq, and we have the maturity to have that conversation. And it seems like you've had the same experience where people who are unfortunately accessing help are basically said, no, you can't do that, or you can't find help for that. So jazakallah khair. I think there's a question, let me see, which has just come up. Is there a guide on how to approach this subject with our kids other than building a strong Islamic foundation? It is becoming very difficult to shut our kids' eyes to the messaging around them. So would it be better to explain them earlier on something about this? I think we might be just having some connection issues. So just wait. There might be some issues with connection, but I think to answer that question, I think definitely that I was actually having a discussion on this recently for our children, and it isn't about having cotton wool or, you know, kind of, sometimes people say, oh, when we talk about this topic, or there's relationship and sex education in school, that we're cotton wooling them to the experience. So we're not saying that. What we're saying is that we build the Islamic perspective. So as a practical example, it's about introducing Prophet Lut's story in a way which is understood by youth, and say that as it was the verse in the Quran that says this was something which wasn't done before. It was completely ma sabakum ahadun min al-alamin. It was an act which wasn't there before, and saying how in Islam the family unit is important. And when we talk about family unit, we talk about the need for having a mother and a father, and the relationship which comes from that. You know, I think there was a question earlier as well, which was talking about what does Brother Ayman mean about alignment of gender role, gender expression, and orientation. And the way I see that is that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has willed us to be a male or a female, then it's in his hikmah that he will then pave paths for us where we can actualize that. So if I'm a male and I have same-sex attraction, or if I have gender identity issues, then this is part of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has destined for me. So Allah already knows that I've created a boy or I've created a girl, and he is going to experience attractions, or he's going to experience confusions about his gender. And we are never left alone in our struggle. We're never left alone without support. And people are tested with different things. Some of us are tested in our gender. Some of us are tested in our sexual attraction. Some of us are tested in other means. But we will have that. It doesn't mean that just because we're experiencing an attraction, or just because we're having we feel separate from our sex and our gender, that there's something, we're innately different from someone else. And I think this is the, as Brother Ayman mentioned, the confusion around identity. It's almost like I experience, therefore I am, rather than this is an experience. This is a part of me. Maybe a part of me is experiencing this. It isn't the whole of me, you know. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our creator. So he knows exactly what we go through, exactly what we feel. And he can create pathways from where we couldn't even imagine there'd be pathways, because at the end of the day, it's his earth, and going back to the purpose of why we're created, and understanding that. And alhamdulillah, I see Brother Ayman is back. If you'd like to add anything to this question around how we approach this topic to our children.
No, I think you kind of covered it. And it depends on the age, of course. So with very young children, 5 and that kindergarten, first, second grade, we teach them the concept of roles in life, right? The child has a role, the mother has a role, the father has a role, the sibling, and so forth. And as Brother Ali was saying, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us in a way that is gonna support our role, right? So explaining these basic concepts to children is gonna help them. I remember when I was a kid, I went to my mom and was like, how do moms have babies, right? Just like we explained to 5 and 7-year-olds how a mother can have baby. What's the typical parent answer is, oh, she keeps him in his tummy, right? In his stomach. In her stomach. But when they grow up a little bit more, we explain that there's other organs in the body where the baby is stored and kept and protected and nurtured and so forth. So age appropriate, you can explain some of these basic concepts. It goes back to not so much focusing on the negative, what's out there, but building the strong, solid foundation, right? Real quick, I'll just share this little thing. Being an engineer, we have a principle in engineering that systems behave based on their structure, not their environment, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in the Quran by focusing on the heart of the believer, not the environment so much. You find a few places in the Quran where Allah says, like in Surah Al-Kahf, أَصْبِرْ نَفْسَكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُم بِالْغَدَاةِ وَالْعَشِيِّ. Be with people who remember Allah in the morning and the evening. Because, good companionship, as the Prophet ﷺ says, الْمَرْءُ عَلَى دِينِ خَلِيلِهِ. The person is on the lifestyle of his friend or buddy. But the more emphasis in the Quran, dozens of times, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the heart. Right? The heart that's strong, that's sound, that has taqwa. The emphasis is on building taqwa, building iman, not on protecting and putting barriers, because no matter what we do, there's going to always be distractions. That is the battle between evil and goodness until the day of judgment. It's not going to go away. So we really want to focus on our strength, right? And the best way to do that with children is to strengthen their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we're teaching them about prayer, is first the concept of Allah and communicating with Allah, right? Rather than this is how you pray and you pray 5 times a day. No, it's time to go talk to Allah. Your child comes to complain to you. Okay, now you've heard him or her. Let's go pray to Allah and ask him to give us help, to ask him for advice, right? So we reinforce these principles and ideas about our relationship with our deen. Inshallah, the kids will grow up having more appreciation for those very deep meanings in the deen.
Inshallah. Thank you for that beautiful response. We're towards the end of the webinar for today. I'd really like to thank Brother Ayman, and I know he's busy, and say salam to all the wonderful youth which are with him at the moment. May Allah bless you. May Allah bless the efforts that you're doing in Maryland. Please remember us in your dua, inshallah. And as Brother Ayman said, if there's anything that was mentioned in this webinar, you want further information, either contact myself or Brother Ayman, and would be happy to help you. And thank you for everybody who has been involved. make this a success. I'm sure across the pond, the efforts of the volunteers of Islamic Leadership Institute, may Allah bless the work that you're doing, and inshallah we speak soon. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khairan.